Okay, so today we're going to talk about maintaining your garden. So I don't know if you guys got a chance to sit down and talk about what you're going to plant, when you're going to plant it, or if you want me to come over and we have an in-person meeting to discuss that. It's entirely up to you, but you guys probably need to get something going pretty quick. We're at the point that tomatoes, fall peppers, all that stuff need to go in the ground pretty quickly. Anyhow, so we're assuming that you guys have a garden planted, and this is all about what things you'll do while you're waiting for the vegetables to get ready to harvest. So how do you keep your plants happy and healthy? Well, everything needs maintenance. Our bodies need maintenance. Our homes need maintenance. Even our vehicles need maintenance. In fact, they need maintenance way more than what I got money to maintain them. And so do plants. So I like the two carrots that look like they're hugging each other. So some things that you need to keep an eye out for. Always check the plants for pests, diseases, and make sure that they look like they're happy and healthy and that they're growing well. We usually recommend that people keep some sort of journal or a notebook where you can take notes. Not only is it helpful at the time, but when you're planning things out next year, you may want to look back at your journal or your notebook to see what problems you had or what successes you had, and see if that makes it easier for you as you're planning the next gardening season. Probably one of the big things you would put in a notebook is when you planted your vegetables, so that you know, hey, maybe I need to back that up a week or two, or maybe I need to go forward a week or two to try to find that optimal window for when the vegetables do the best. Visiting and checking your garden every day is usually recommended because that way you're going to catch any problems before they actually get started, especially insects. Insects such as aphids can really take off and cause huge problems if they're left unattended for even 2 or 3 days. So we want to catch those and nip those in the bud pretty quickly. Same way with some of your fungal issues. So what things should you look for? Any of you ever laid in the grass like that and like you're on a safari? So things you should look for: insects. Check the leaves for holes in the leaves, or check to see whether they look like they've been eaten away. This usually indicates insect feeding. I can look at the eating patterns and tell you generally what insects are causing the problem. So if it's chewing or eating from the edge of the leaf inwards, I usually know that that's some sort of caterpillar. If it's little round holes in the center of the leaf, anybody have any idea of what might cause that?
Nope.
It's usually going to be snails or slugs. They cannot support their own body weight to eat from the edge, so they have to crawl up onto the leaf and then begin to eat while they're on the leaf. So that's when we see those kinds of holes. You also look for what's called frass. Y'all know what frass is? It's insect.
Nope.
Insect food. So see the droppings left behind by insects, and that's a good indicator that there's something, some sort of insect that's eating away at your plants. You also want to look for light conditions to make sure that the plants are either getting enough sunlight or maybe are getting too much sunlight. It is possible in our area for plants to get too much sunlight in our hot summer months, but like I told you earlier, generally the summer is not a gardening season here in South Texas. Unless you're growing okra. Okra will produce all the way through the summer here. So you guys, if you're wanting to do a summer garden, you'll do different types of okra. That's a joke, by the way. Are the plants getting enough sunlight to produce healthy growth? You can tell because they'll usually be kind of pale, or the leaves won't look like they're normal, maybe misshapen a little bit if they're not getting enough sunlight. If they're getting too much sunlight, then the leaves are most likely going to have burn spots on them, which is sun scald or sunburn to them. Also, if you've got thin stalks or not very many leaves, that's a good sign that maybe there's not enough sunlight. If they're scraggly and tall, then you probably need to think about putting those plants in a different location the next year that's got more sunlight. Water is a huge problem. Consistent watering is probably the most important thing that I can tell you about having a vegetable garden. You need to make sure that you are watering consistently. Inconsistent watering leads to all of the problems that you see in these pictures. In the top left corner, you'll see tomatoes that have what we call blossom end rot. And that's caused by inconsistent watering, and it causes a nutritional deficiency in the tomato, and it's rotting out on the bottom. And then you have squash that's also being watered improperly, similar to the blossom end rot on the tomato. Then you have a watermelon that has basically a blossom end rot. And then what do you think is going on with the last tomato picture? In that photo, the tomato is not being watered in a consistent pattern. So it's being allowed to go really, really dry, and then it's getting a huge amount of rainfall, and the tomato cells are not able to absorb and distribute that water evenly, or they soak up too much of the water all at one time, and it causes those cells to burst, and it leads to this cracking of the tomatoes. So the best way to water is water it heavily and then allow it to dry completely out. And then water it heavily again and allow it to dry completely out. And that's a general rule of thumb with all plants, not just vegetables. But forgetting to water and then soaking and then forgetting to water and soaking is probably the worst thing that you can do for your vegetables. So maintaining them and making sure that they have enough water is the best way. Now, some people like to go out and water them a little bit every day. That's an improper water technique as well. They don't do well. Most vegetables do not do well if the soil stays too wet. So watering them heavily and allowing them to dry completely out is the best thing that you can do.
What is the time frame ideally of that? I mean, is it like a day or two?
It changes. It depends on the weather. So in the summertime, you're probably looking at watering, if you're talking about raised beds, every 2 to 3 days. In the cooler parts of the year, probably a good soaking every 4 to 5 days is usually adequate. You'll get the hang of it by looking for the signs in the plants that they need to be watered. You also could purchase some small water meters. They're just a little device that's battery operated that has a prong that sticks down into the soil, and it tells you how much moisture is left in the soil. So, but you'll get the hang of it. What I can tell you is it's not going to be every single day. So go out there, and just because the surface of the soil is dry doesn't mean there's not moisture in there. You may want to poke your finger down into the bed and see how far you have to dig before you hit moisture. Most of the vegetable roots are growing in the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. So if it's moist down in that area, then it probably doesn't need to be watered quite yet. And you don't want to let it get bone dry either. You want to let it moderately dry out and then water it really good again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And then, of course, we have these crazy high rainfall events from time to time, and there's not a lot you can do about it. But if you do see that we're going to have one of these big rainfall events, you can go out there and make yourself kind of like a little teepee. Put some plastic with some stakes and maybe some bamboo stakes or something to kind of act as a watershed to divert some of that water away from the plants. But that's only if the weather is saying that we're going to have one of these 3, 4, 5 inch rain events. This time, a couple inches of rain is actually good for the bed. So, in this picture that's here with the tomato plant, you see a couple of things that indicate that it's getting overwatered. You can begin to see that the bottom leaves are turning yellow, and there's a chance that there is some root rot going on. Generally, by the time you see wilting in an overwatered plant, it's too late. The root system is so damaged that the plant is going to die. So we don't want to let it get to that point. Looking at the picture, what's one of the problems that you see besides the standing water?
They're yellow leaves.
They are. What do you think the reason is for the water standing in that pot?
There's nothing on the bottom. Did they put a hole or?
They didn't put holes. They didn't put a way for the water to drain out. So that's a big no-no. So we always want to make sure if we've got pots that are outside that they've got holes in the bottom so that there's some way for excess moisture to run off. Good observation. We may want to observe our vegetables and take notes about which ones maybe could have used some sort of plant support. Some things that generally need plant support or anything that's vining. Y'all tell me some vegetables that you know of that vine.
Grapes?
Great.
That's fruit.
It's a fruit, but it's okay. Let's see. Cucumbers. Anybody grown cucumbers before? They're definitely a vine. Cantaloupes. Watermelons. I'm probably not going to try to grow watermelons on a trellis though, or cantaloupes, either one. By the way, watermelons and cantaloupes both take up huge amounts of room, as do cucumbers. So you can't just grow them in a little 1 to 2 foot space. They're probably going to take most of a raised bed. They do have a cucumber type that's called a bush cucumber though, that stays relatively compact. So that's something that you may want to consider growing some bush cucumbers instead of trelling cucumbers. Some other things that benefit from having plant support are things like beans. They have a tendency to do very well on plant support, and it also makes it much easier for you to pick the beans when it's ready to time to harvest. So anyway, keep notes of these in your journal and saying, oh, well, this plant would have done better if we'd have trellised it or given it some sort of support. Tomatoes generally have to be stalked or staked. You can make tomato cages. You do not have to go out and buy tomato cages. You can actually buy a roll of wire. Do you see the tomato cage number 2? That one can actually be made out of wire. You just cut out your piece of wire and then you take some thinner wire and just tie it together, and that can be used to stake to provide support for tomatoes as well. And those can be reused each year. The time to put those in place is when the tomato is still young, where you can slip it over the top of the tomato. If you wait until the tomato begins to fall over, it's usually too big and you're going to damage the tomato plant while you're trying to get the tomato cage around it. Weeding and mulching. Take a look at this bed. Somebody has not been out there for quite a while. You can see the vegetables in the background, but the rest of the bed is plumb full of weeds. Putting a layer of mulch is beneficial. The mulch should be put in at 2 to 3 inches deep, and it actually helps to control the soil moisture. It also helps to keep weeds out. I think I said it before, but I'm going to say it again. If you just planted seeds, you do not want to put the mulch in that area until your seedlings come up and they're at least 3 inches tall. At that point, then you can go ahead and add the mulch. We also want to keep the mulch away from the stems of our plants, because if it is inhibiting weed growth, it may actually try to inhibit your vegetable growth as well. The cool thing about mulch is that as it breaks down, it provides organic matter to the bed as well. You can make mulch from all kinds of things. There's paper mulches, organic matter like leaves, grass, straw, or your bagged wood products. Fertilizing. The nutrients in a raised bed will deplete fairly quickly because you're only dealing with 10 to 12 inches of soil. So we generally recommend that you use some sort of organic fertilizer each year. One of the ones that we generally give out to the schools that have raised beds is Plant Tone. Want me to repeat that? It's Plant Tone. It's an organic slow release fertilizer. And the plants need these fertilizers, these nutrients, in order for them to produce all the different parts. They need nitrogen for the plant growth of the leaves and the stem. They need phosphorus for fruit and flowers, and they need potassium for strong roots, plus some of the micronutrients that are in that product as well. There are basically two types of fertilizers. There's one that there's what we call organic, meaning that it comes from what was once living things, and it is going to break down naturally and is naturally a slow release fertilizer. Some examples of organic fertilizers are manures, compost teas, and peat moss. So there's all different kinds of things. Almost any type of manure work is an organic fertilizer as long as it's been composted. You do not want to gather it straight up out of the barnyard and take it out there and put it on your bed, because it's what they call hot while it's decomposing. In other words, the microbes are working and they're creating heat. And if you put it in that area, it could cause problems for your plants because it has tendency to pull the nitrogen out of the soil while it's decomposing. So put it in a big pile somewhere and let it break down completely. Once it's not hot anymore, then it's ready to use on your garden. You can also buy bagged organic products if you would like to use that. And then we have all kinds of inorganic fertilizers. These are fertilizers that are commercially made. I do like Osmocote, which is what is in the picture. And then there are other types of water soluble or granular fertilizers that you can use. I tend to try to go with the organics and keep my bed, the nutrients in it at a high level, and then I don't ever have to worry about using inorganics. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need a little boost of something pretty quickly, then you may want to consider using an inorganic fertilizer. Inorganic fertilizers also have a tendency, because they break down more quickly, to burn the plants much easier. So stay away from those unless you just have to give it a little quick boost of something. Here's another page that tells some of the different organic fertilizers: compost, compost tea, farm manure, green manure. Do you know what green manure is? It would be like grass clippings, anything that was green that you put into a pile and allowed it to compost. That's a green manure. Granulated chicken manure, and then industrial-wise manufactured fertilizers. These are produced by industry, but they're still considered to be organic because they've come from once living things, and that those include things like bone meal, fish meal, and fish emulsion. Do you guys know what these three things are? Bone meal, fish meal, and fish emulsion.
Never heard of it.
Okay, bone meal and these all come from the meat industry, basically. So as they process meat and they have the bones that are left over, then those bones are ground up and they're composted, and that is bone meal. Fish meal is similar. After they've collected the fillets and they have the leftover carcasses of the fish, I guess is the way to put it, then they're put into big piles and they're composted until everything is broken down, and that's fish meal. Fish emulsion, the carcasses are put into liquid and they're liquefied, and the result is a liquid fish fertilizer that's called fish emulsion. Sounds all kind of gross, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Fish emulsion has a pretty strong smell to it. I'm just telling you right now. The other two, once they're composted, have no odor to them. There's also a product called blood meal, by the way, and that's the blood that's collected from slaughterhouses, and it is composted also and dried, and that's blood meal. Applying fertilizers, remember to always wear gloves and follow the product label and mix it according to the directions so that you get the proper use. Here's an example of an outdoor classroom for you. You guys may want to consider building something like this since you're going to have students involved at some point, right? Paul, will you guys have students involved in your gardens at some point?
Yeah, there'll be some community service folks working out there to maintain.
So you may want to set up a space out there where maybe they can sit down and you guys can talk to them about what needs to be done or discuss, you know, day-to-day problems, or even, you know, carry to them some of the things that we've talked about in this series so far. I'd be glad to help with that if y'all decide that you want to.
But mostly it's going to be some of the staff that are interested in doing these raised gardens. The kids may pull weeds, they may help build the boxes and stuff. All the maintaining and planting and stuff will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Here's another example of an outdoor classroom. And then always feel free to personalize things. You know, we've done beds at quite a few daycare centers, and we let them paint them. The kids have put their handprints on before. They do all kinds of stuff. I do want to point out some things in this picture, though. That is a cantaloupe that's growing there. Can you see how much space that cantaloupe is taking up? It takes up a huge amount of that bed, and they wanted to plant corn, so they put corn into the bed as well. Both those things take up lots of room, so you may want to consider that when you're talking about how to build your beds, or whether you're going to do some in-ground gardening, or how many different beds that you want to put in. And then you may want to do some cooking demos. It might be cool to pull some of the vegetables out of the garden and maybe do some cooking demos for some of the other staff, maybe to get more people interested, or we do them for cooking demos for the kids. There's a lot of kids that have never tasted fresh vegetables. They don't know what it's like to have a vine ripened tomato. All they've ever eaten is what comes from the grocery store. So letting them taste some of these things. And I'm going to tell you a secret. A staff member can take a vegetable out of the garden and eat it in front of the kids, and they're not inspired to even try it. But if you can find a brave kid who isn't afraid to eat one of the vegetables, the other kids will follow suit pretty quickly. Just from experience, that's what we have found. And then celebrate. You may want to do maybe not like an opening ceremony, but we have a garden class at the YWCA, which is a bunch of my little old ladies from the YWCA, and they always do an opening celebration. They all bring food and potluck and everything. And then when we're at the last class of the year, they do a closing celebration, and they just like to eat, I think. But they have a good time with it and enjoy what we're doing. They also do a plant swap. And that might be something you guys want to consider, is they bring either cuttings or plants from their own gardens, and they have a day, I think a day once every month or once every 2 months, where they bring those in and they just share them with each other. And the only requirement we have is that they have to explain a little bit about how to grow that plant and tell what that plant is if they know what it is. The end.